MANOR is bringing in medieval fans from around the world together, ready for this new upcoming RTS that looks to be changing the face of city builders. But what's next? Well, in this video I'm going to be covering the life of a peasant, how they grow, how they survive, and what causes your populace to rebel and eventually turn against you, burning and pillaging your village and taking down what was once theirs, because MANOR is making medieval look absolutely brutal. Recently, a full 2-page Q&A was released on behalf of Slavic Magic, going over some of the less obvious questions asked about the medieval city builder. Of course, no one wants to sit there for 30 minutes picking through everything. I mean, what kind of a person would do that? Well, I have. So, you can enjoy 8 minutes of the highlighted, condensed best stuff. Oh, what I won't do for my subscribers. And a bit of ad revenue. One massive factor in the game is growing your settlement. From humble beginnings as a few houses in a world of nothingness, to a vast sprawling city, trading with others, expanding to the far-reaching regions, and eventually growing enough to be able to not only defend yourself from the outside world, but train an army and take it for your own. One big question is, how do peasants actually work? Peasants within MANOR all have their own lives, having a name, a home, and a place of work, whether they're a blacksmith, a farmer, a tailor, or even a soldier. The NPCs will move between these places as you would expect on a usual day in the life of a lowly villager. Think of it as a medieval dynasty, but in the RTS version, following the life of a peasant and how they'd go about their usual day. However, what if they don't have a job? What if they're like a YouTuber and completely unemployed? Well, peasants are assigned to general labor if they don't have their own job to do. They will help with random bits around your settlement as they are needed, maybe helping with things like the harvest or maybe some building work depending on what events are taking part in the direction the settlement is heading. So it's kind of like city skylines, right? Where everyone has their own job and they have their own home, and the sort of game loop is them going between it as you move around and construct things for them to advance. Well, almost. Yeah, it kind of feels like that kind of vibe in MANOR, but I think it's going to be on a much more personable level, as a medieval village isn't going to be that vast scale that you see in these sprawling cities of city skylines. But how do your settlements grow? Well, when it comes to game development and mechanics, there are many different options that developers can go with, things that have been done and tried and tested in the past, but they might not all work in MANOR, because it depends completely on the gameplay style and the period the game is set in. To move forward and to keep the game at a decent playable pace, peasants in MANOR are just spawned in as population increases, as the map is way too big and full of regions to have the peasants do the usual thing of appearing from the edge of the map, then making the way to settle with your people. Also, waiting for a child to grow up from a baby to an adult would take way too long to keep the progressive momentum of the game loop, so things like speeding up the game itself would have to be done in order to make it fun and playable. But then again, that just takes away from the realistic angle that MANOR is going for, kind of defeating the object of the game. Just spawning in peasants might be quite disappointing for many people. A lot of people want something way more realistic, but it kind of makes sense with the style the game's going for. Trying to keep that game loop going and make it interesting without having to wait hours and hours for peasants to be able to grow up from a baby, or watching them come from regions of the map that haven't even been explored yet or even been owned by other factions. It just doesn't really make sense. So whilst it isn't ideal, it seems like the best option we have. On the topic of peasants, they also won't really be a population cap. It's just really as much as your computer can handle at this point in time. I'm sure later on there will be a cap put in place for the population to stop people breaking their machines, but currently it's been confirmed that it's over 16,000 peasants. Okay, that 16,000 will completely melt your system, but it's possible. It also hasn't really been confirmed whether this population cap is just for your settlement or it includes the wider regions and areas. For example, going to war with a neighboring city, you take your troops. How does it calculate the population count there? Will it calculate your troops and their troops together and that will be the overall population, or will it include the settlers back home? But let's go a little bit more in depth with the mechanics of your villagers. As you would expect, they all have their own needs and requirements that need to be met. In other words, you've got to look after them. But if they start to get annoyed, if they start to find that maybe their needs aren't quite being met by your rule, they can rebel. After loyalty in the region drops to -100, a number of villagers will turn into bandits. They start looting and burning buildings, maybe even houses and production facilities that they once owned. They then will run off with any treasure or loot that they took from your village to never be seen again. We can see some of the burning building mechanics that have already been showcased in the game, and my god does it look beautiful. The way that the fire rises up with bits of wood dropping off as the structure is burnt away. So how can you stop this from happening? How do you keep the loyalty of your fellow subjects up? Well, you'd expect the basics like food and firewood, making sure people don't starve or get freezing in winter. But there's also things like luxuries, such as candles, shoes, clothes. All these things will make sure they stay extra happy and stop any revolts from happening. Along with this are added policies that you can set as the Lord of the Manor. These can be set over your settlement, sort of like rules. Things like decreasing food consumption to save for a future war, but this will also decrease loyalty in the long run, or maybe focusing on the food production itself to the expense of other aspects of your economy. One of the examples given was the policy of focusing on hunting game, but then your crops and farms will start to wither as they're not being tended to. This sort of push-pull and weighing up of advantages and disadvantages is one of the many cool things that I think MANOR is going so in detail on. Resources do have to be looked after, however. Food will rot. Grain and meat need to be kept in their respectful places, such as larders or grain silos, or you're going to lose them over the long winters, causing your villagers to starve and then eventually revolt. This will also be affected throughout the seasons in the game. In winter, ploughing can't go ahead until the ground freezes. Harvests will have to be done in the late summer, and of course, without firewood in the cold months, your subjects can freeze. There's also some more direct connotations to the weather and seasons. For example, when it gets really snowy, it will bog down your villagers. They'll walk and work slower in the snow and winter seasons. But then the game starts to get a bit darker, showing us the more realistic and cruel side of the medieval world. With the implementation of a disease system, peasants can get ill from various sources throughout the game, just like they would in the real world. If they have the right food and supplements with basic healing herbs, they will start to heal over time, but it is slow. Sometimes the disease can kill them off before full recovery. Previously, MANOR did have a herbalist system, but Slavic Magic, the developer, didn't really find it was all that balanced, as building just a few herbalists at the beginning of your game, you could eradicate all the diseases for the rest of your gameplay, which, whilst handy, wasn't really that realistic or even fun. This means that things like herbs are way more limited now. There are plans for an immunity system in the future though. The better food variety that you have in your settlement, the less likely illness is. This is due to the better diets that your villagers have, giving them more immunity and more ability to fight any diseases that come their way. But even that won't save your people from the potential of full-on plague events. This has been just one part of the Q&A. I'll leave a complete link in the description to all the other aspects that I haven't covered yet. I will be bringing another video out focusing on warfare and that aspect that we've been shown. But if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button because I'll be bringing you all the MANOR news as soon as it comes out. But leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, leave a dislike if you didn't. But until then, I will see you in the next one.